Hello there. Welcome back to the DEX Show for 2026. And I'd love to start the year with happier news, but it really does behoove us to pause for a minute before we introduce today's show to acknowledge the passing last month of a friend of the show, an absolute legend in the DEX space in Alan Nance. On a personal note, I've been working in the DEX space for around 6 years, and nobody was more welcoming or informative than Alan. Just a really lovely, kind, funny, engaged and engaging person to work with. An absolute pleasure to have on the show repeatedly down the years. I think he was our second or third guest ever. So it could be said, that he was one of the guests we had in mind when we launched the podcast. So sending, as a show, Tim, myself, everybody who's worked with Alan at Nexthink, sending our prayers and our thoughts to his family, of course, but also his friends and his colleagues. R.I.P. Alan Nance.
Welcome, IT changemakers, to the DEX Show with Tim Flower and Tom McGraw. Let's get into it.
Happy New Year, changemakers. Happy 2026, my goodness. And regular listeners will know how we like to start the year on the DEX Show. It's with the return of a very special guest, none other than Nexthink Chief Product Officer Samuele Gantner. Sam's going to be joined by somebody else also, but Tim and I welcome Sam first of all. Sam, how are you doing? Welcome back.
Always good to have you, Sam.
Hey, and awesome to be back. Thank you so much for the invite. There's no better way for me to start the year than being with you guys for an episode.
You're one of our main beloved traditions, Sam. It's good to have you. And today, it's not only welcoming back, you as a returning guest, but for the first time, unbelievably, for the first time, Nexthink's own Chief Technology Officer is joining Sam for the show. Is Vedant Sampath. Vedant, how has it happened? How have we gone so long without managing to make this connection and get you on the show? There's just Nexthink is just so full of guests, you can overlook one as good as yourself. But welcome to the show for the first time.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to be here. It's a great way to start off the year. Great to be with Sam on the show as well. I like to keep a low profile, so I think I've managed to successfully do that.
A little too successful, maybe, Vedant. And but we got a real power couple on the show, Tim, to kick off the year. No?
Yes, sir.
So I know we've got kind of two sections actually, which is pretty for the first time. Got an interesting structure to this discussion, and I'm going to kick us off, guys. Obviously, it's special to have who I think of at the very least as Nexthink's two technology captains with us together. And I thought it would be interesting to start by talking about the last 2 to 3 years of profound technological transformation and what they have meant for your teams and the areas of the business that you oversee. So Vedant, as first time guest, let's start with you. Vedant, how has AI forced Nexthink and forced yourself to rethink the product, or should I say technology, in your case, design process? So what part of the traditional research cycle from prototyping to iteration have had to be restructured, first of all, because AI as a technology simply behaves so differently from conventional software?
So I look at it in two parts, actually. The first one is we make extensive use of AI coding tools, and this is something that has changed in the last couple of years. So these tools are fundamentally changing how software is being developed. So my team, for example, makes extensive use of tools that you may be familiar with, things like Cursor, Windsurf, GitHub Copilot, Claude Code, you name it. There are many more as well. And like any company, there are those who jump into using these tools and others who need to be coaxed, and they need to get over their skepticism and kind of using new ways of doing things. But I, for one, personally believe that there's a massive impact in improving software development using these tools. But it is a new muscle that you need to develop. And it's like you're doing pair programming, for example, with another developer, or assigning tasks to a junior developer. These things don't come naturally for most people. you often need to be trained to kind of incorporate these tools into your planning, development, and review process. So we've done that. We've offered a lot of training in each of these tools, and we monitor adoption and assist people who may be having difficulty. So, and we're seeing the impact of all of that, major productivity gains kind of helping with our innovation. So, and this is something your IT listeners, I'm sure, are going through as well. I'm sure they're under a lot of pressure from management to kind of monitor AI tool use, the value that AI is getting to their employees, identify shadow AI, and doing this remains a challenge for them. And the same thing for us on that one. And secondly, and more specifically to the question you asked me, for a company like Nexthink, we are building AI products, right? And so when you're doing that, it's a very different way. There is fundamental ways in which software development for building agents is very different from traditional software developments. People talk about growing AI products rather than building it, and that's very true. In enterprise software, for example, I've never previously had to think of a tone of interaction, for example, whether it's being empathetic or not, for example. Are all the guardrails in place? These are things as enterprise software developers we never really thought of. But if you're building a conversational agent, that is core to what you're doing. You need to kind of make it front and center. And the other thing is as fast as AI and these frontier models are evolving, the AI tools to support the development of AI application development is also evolving equally fast. So the way we did development 2 or 3 years ago, completely different from what we're doing now. Vector databases, platforms like LangChain to do evals, create benchmarks, test and validate agents, model context protocol, MCP, which I'm sure your listeners have heard of, incorporate various types of data sources into this AI, making it easy for all of that to happen. All of those have changed how you develop AI products. But for us at Nexthink, innovation and change is core to our culture, and our teams have really adapted very well to this change. It's a great time to be in this business.
Vedant, before I ask a sort of related question of Sam, I'm interested. If you think of your career or your role in the year preceding the launch of the unveiling of AI, 2-3 years ago, right, when we all started, it started changing everything. How, if you had to put a percentage to it, how different is your role now to what it was then? And it might just be 5%, it might be 10%, it might be 30%. I have no idea. But if you had to pull a number out, what would it be?
I don't believe my role has changed substantially. Ultimately, Ultimately, you are building products. You are building products that solve a specific problem. The tools you use and how you build it has changed, and that has changed over a period of time. When you went, for example, from building on-prem products to using the cloud, that changed substantially. And then now it's in that same order that you're doing. You have to use new tools. You have to understand how these tools work. It's not like your typical software development like I just discussed. So you are essentially building a role rather than building tools and workbenches for certain roles, for certain users. So that is where it's fundamentally different. It's not just workflows, databases, or dashboards and all of that. It's all of that bundled together into an intelligent agent that does everything, including the workflow that a human might have done, albeit at a certain lower level than a human does. So a human supervision may still be important, but that's the fundamental way in which I think AI has changed software development.
Excellent. Sam, as AI has been playing a sort of larger and larger role in product development, what have been the major learnings for you in your role around managing the issues of accuracy and quality, which are inevitable concerns for anybody working with AI? For you, what did you find were the hardest aspects of ensuring reliable, consistent experience when you're no longer dealing with what you might call deterministic software.
Yeah, that's quite an adventure and quite a new challenge, right? The key around that is really building the proper evaluations, which are basically standardized methods that you put in place to measure how well the agent is performing with respect to specific tasks. Now, to understand how it works, we need to look for a second at how an agent is constructed, right? And maybe different from what people might think, an AI agent is not a monolith, is not a one thing, but is fundamentally composed by two things. One is really the core agent, kind of your brain that is doing the reasoning, but then the brain uses a set of tools in order to perform tasks, to look up knowledge and so on and so forth. So when you need to test all of that, you need to test both. You need to test that the reasoning of the agent is sound, but then you also need to make sure that the tools that it's using are giving the correct answers. And you need to test, you need to test for accuracy, for reliability, for speed. There are so many things. You can have a great agent, but it takes 2 minutes to answer a question, and then it doesn't feel great anymore, right? So the way that you do that is you start by testing the tools, because that's the easiest thing. I give you an example. One of the tools of Assist is a tool that takes text and transforms that into an MQL query. And testing that is pretty easy, because basically you have a huge catalog of couples text query, and then you just check that it matches. So it's not so hard. For the agent, it's much more difficult, right? Because these agents, they're performing overall complex tasks. So the way that we did it is that we had to create a DEX benchmark. So something that really, it's a whole evaluation of what it means to be a very capable DEX expert, DEX analyst. It's composed by 100 questions. And then we get the agent to take the test, right? And then we use another agent to evaluate how well our agent took the test, which is kind of interesting. And then at the end, you get a score and you understand what is how it's happening. Now, this whole thing is actually a huge amount of work. It takes a lot of development effort to come up with all of these things, right? And what I noticed that often companies, they don't understand the importance of that. You see very often, companies, they start just coding the agent without doing all of this background work or creating the evaluations and the testing and all of that. And then what happens is that maybe one day they have a great model, and the next day there is an update, and the model becomes terrible. And they don't even realize it, because it's very hard. Maybe it still performs better in a certain type of tasks, but other tasks it became much, much worse. So, my point is, you need to invest into that, and you need to create these things beforehand and, absorb that cost, because it's the only way to do a great thing. Then the other thing is, one of the fundamental aspects that people interacting with agents are looking at is the concept of consistency. And this is a fundamental pact with the people using the agents, right? If you ask the same question to the agent twice, you're not going to get the same answer. It's not going to happen. You guys, I think you're using GPT or Gemini or whatever. You're living that every day, right? But for us as humans, it's not so easy to digest that thing. And the way that I look at that is that basically I look at agents like very smart individuals that have a similar knowledge, but every time you ask the question to another individual. So obviously you're going to get a different answer. And here the key is that us as humans, we can influence that. So if you ask a very broad and open question, then obviously the answer that you get is going to be very different every single time. However, if you're very specific with your prompt and you really nail the type of answer that you want to get, then you're going to see much more consistency in the way that these agents are answering. So bottom line, I think, lots of effort for the people that are building the agents, but then also us as a population of humans that are starting to interact more and more with agents, we need to understand their way of functioning and adapt our habits, expectations, and our way of interacting, to be able to make the most out of that.
Guardrails, effectively, I think whatever area you're working, that's an essential thing when it comes to AI. And Vedant, from a CTO perspective, what have been the biggest architectural or operational challenges that emerged when you shifted from building those deterministic systems to AI powered ones? And what have been the biggest internal transformation for your team structure and governance and operational kind of mode?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it kind of relates to some things that Sam kind of talked about earlier as well, and what I'd said earlier. So we are building, like I said, a role, an agent. In our case, like Sam was talking about, we're building, for example, the junior support agent. You're not building the workbench, the tools like I was talking about earlier. I mean, in other domains, you may be building a junior underwriter, a junior paralegal, and so on. That's the fundamental way of thinking that has changed. But there are some things that remain the same. You still have to build a lot of scaffolding that is required to run these software agent. Take Spark, our employee support agent, for example. We need to integrate it into Teams, and we have to have tools to load knowledge bases into them. We need to build a cockpit to configure and manage the agent so that the user, remember, this is a junior agent, so we need that IT admin to kind of help with the conversation, nudge it at times, ensure that the conversation is can be improved with additional knowledge bases and so on. All of these require typical software design and development processes we are used to. And I'd say that's about half the work that needs to be done. Often it's very easy to build a POC with AI, but when you actually take the trouble to get something into production, you find that there's all of this that you need to build. This is the deterministic part of software development, remains the same. What's different, and Sam kind of alluded to a lot of these things, is that the way the core AI agent or the intelligence is developed, it is probabilistic, as you mentioned. And part of developing your agent using AI and LLM models is to be able to address the tonality, empathy, and all the other good stuff that I talked about earlier if you're building a conversational agent. So you need to kind of have that capability to be able to iteratively build that, improve upon it, and so on. One of the benefits at Nexthink we had is, as you know, we manage petabytes of data in the Nexthink Infinity platform. And machine learning, even before all the generative AI became popular, was core to how we analyzed data. We had built the platform essentially to make accessing and analyzing this type of data easy both for humans and for machines, like a unified data model. We have something called Nexthink Query Language, NQL. So when we got to generative AI, this is in the after 22, 23, 24, we started with the most difficult problem first, basically, building a natural language interface to that query language I talked about, to NQL. And this is something that LLMs cannot do quite as effectively on their own. So we had to fine tune an LLM to be able to do that. And I'm happy to say that the one that we've got passes the Nexthink NQL certification, which isn't an easy test, I may add. So once we mastered that, the rest became a little easier. We built a number of additional tools to assist the reasoning process, a tool to understand the user context, who you are, which is your device, one to get kind of a time-based view on things, what happened on the devices yesterday, what happened in the last week, what happened in the last 2 weeks. Have these freezes and crashes been a recurring thing if you need to kind of find what the problem is? And we combined all of that, including the knowledge bases that you may have, to the foundational knowledge LLM, in our case, Anthropic, and you had this junior support agent who's getting smarter every day. So essentially, software development, intelligent AI agent that is conversational, and we have this junior software agent, junior support agent. But challenges remain. As Sam mentioned, we need extensive benchmarks. Every time you move from one version of the LLM to another, there are subtle things that change, that impact conversations, how things happen. So we need to have all of those benchmarks. We need to make sure every time that the guardrails remain effective. And most importantly, that you can trust that you have a secure and accurate agent and you're protected from all of the hallucinations and other things that LLMs are known for. Hopefully that gives you the picture of what's changed.
And by the way, by now, the support agent is very senior, right? He's no longer...
It's not a new junior agent. He's graduated from the help desk.
We should have him on later this year, Tim. I think we can do.
We did that a while back. We should see how that's changed.
We did. We had a system.
So, Tom, I want to highlight what a unique opportunity this is for folks that are listening in to have not just our chief product officer, which is always a highlight, but also our CTO and Vedant and Sam here together to give that really unique perspective of the Nexthink history, the Nexthink foundation, our approach, but then also the outcomes for our customers. So, guys, before we get into a little bit of Q&A, I want to set kind of the transition from great information on Nexthink foundation and our approach into the outcomes. So I think the main point that we collectively have been singing here at Nexthink for a while, and the rise of AI makes even more important and makes it even more clear. There's 3 dimensions of corporate AI, right? And they define some really important directions that every IT team needs to pursue to really drive successful digital transformation. The first is AI for IT. And this is automation taken to the next level, the creation of autonomous experiences and the enablement of preventative operations. It creates that IT org that shifts from reactive to proactive, ultimately to zero tickets. So AI for IT is the first dimension. The second is AI for employees. This is about coaching in the flow of work. Vedant, you talked about it a little bit with that empathy and sympathy for employees and the struggle that they have, the self-help and conversational resolutions of both technical issues and knowledge gaps. It helps get employees the instant contextual support they need and drive that AI adoption. So AI for employees. The third is AI for the business that IT supports. Creates the visibility needed for proper governance and achievement of ROI. We're hearing all over the place now. One of the biggest issues with AI is the return on the investment. Is it worth the money we're spending to get back the benefits? But the AI for the business creates that enterprise-wide intelligence layer for secure, governed, high ROI transformation. So I wanted to set that foundation because I want to ask you each a question about each of those 3 pillars. So Sam, let's start. And I'm going to kind of give you a question, but feel free to add your thoughts wherever you want to take it. So AI for IT, experience management and proactive IT. And I'm looking at my history, Sam, and you were out with me when I was a customer and looked at how we were implementing at the Hartford, right? It was still a pretty heavy lift back then. AI doing discovery and analysis, but the automation still needed a fair amount of IT touch, right? You had to build scripts. You had to do the next level of what you wanted to implement. We're now moving to truly autonomous management, where IT teams can move from creating problems to preventing them. And as a customer, my teams were able to do that without modern AI capabilities, but it was an effort. What innovations make preventative operations and the path to zero tickets not only achievable, but hugely efficient for IT teams today? And then a part B on that, what's next? What still needs to be solved?
Yeah, it's a great topic. Look, when you look at this, there are really 2 aspects, right? There is proactive work, and then there is reactive work. And the way that we define it is proactive work is everything that happens without an employee having to say anything. And reactive work is it can still be automated, but the trigger for doing something is the employee saying something to your end. And then across these 2 dimensions, when you want to automate, you have 2 dimensions, right? There is deterministic or agentic. In the past, there was the deterministic. In the future, it's more agentic, but there is still a space for deterministic. So when we look at the pure deterministic, what is the problem with that for IT? The problem is that every problem, every incident that you want to solve, you need to hard code it. Give you an example. You want to make sure that people never have a problem with the VPN. And so somebody needs to write a script that gets in there and say, okay, if the VPN is not installed, then you need to install it. If it's not connected, you need to connect it. If it's not authenticated, then you need to authenticate it. If that doesn't work, you need to look at the configuration, so on and so on and so forth. Now, that's okay, because you can still avoid a huge number of problems, right? But all of that work that you put in there only fixes VPN problems. What about everything else? And here, it's interesting because when you look at all of these things, the 80-20 rule applies, but IT teams are still spending a huge amount of time on the long tail.
Mm-hmm.
And those often are the most difficult things, right? Password resets, okay, now everybody has automation for that. But what about the 500 other issues that are happening from time to time? Then the other problem is also, even if you have the automation, you still need to know when to trigger it, right? What is the signal that is telling you that you need to do that? With the AI, the difference is the following. You just need to build the building blocks. A building block is install an application. Another building block is start an application. Another one is set a configuration. But everything else is parametric. And what is important is that the orchestration of these building blocks, you don't do it by hand anymore, but the agent, the AI agent on the fly, does that for you. And so you go from having to write 500 automation to cover 500 problems to maybe writing 50 building blocks to cover 5,000 problems. So you can see how much time IT is going to save around all of that. And by the way, the building blocks, the other advantage is that the building blocks are very similar company to company. So even for those, there is a much more reusability, right? It's less specific stuff. So what is the outcome of that is that IT can automate more, and IT personnel can focus on approving the building blocks and deciding what are the boundaries in which AI can operate, rather than having to do all of these manual efforts. And then obviously, the other outcome is that the experience for employees is so much better. And this is similar between proactive and reactive, by the way. It's kind of the same principles, right? Now, where I'm saying that there's still a space for deterministic actions is when you want part of your process to be executed every time exactly 100% in the same way. I'll give you an example. Let's say that you want to automate software provisioning. But for programs that are particularly expensive or things that are not usually used within a department, you want manager approval, right? That's not something that necessarily you're okay to leave the AI choosing. You want a deterministic thing that looks at who is exactly the manager of this person, right? You want to execute step by step. And there in that case, it's where you combine the two approaches. So one of your building blocks is get approval to install this software. And within that, you still have a more traditional workflow that is, if then else or whatever, visual editor kind of thing. Now, the difference is that even in that case, you can simplify by using AI to generate these workflows. So that rather than having a developer writing the code or an engineer put in the building blocks, the judge is going to prompt it and vibe code it, and then that part is going to get easier and faster as well, right? So yeah, that's a bit the situation. We did a huge amount of work on the reactive piece, agentic. We have an incredible solution for the proactive piece, deterministic. One of the things that we're going to focus on next year is to do the proactive piece in an agentic way as well. It's going to be very exciting.
Yeah, I think it's for our IT audience, I think it's really intriguing to take some of those fundamental practices of software coding into delivery of IT, right? The concept of core code and subroutines, the least common denominator and top-down programming into the deterministic subroutines that can be either reused or can be specific to a unique problem and then come back to the core part of it. I think the building block analogy is perfect for IT automation, and to have that agentic AI in the background doing some of that decision making for you is really intriguing. Vedant, for the second pillar, employees are interacting with AI directly through coaching and in the flow of work and for conversational remediation. I've never really liked, just as maybe a bit of a side commentary, this construct of shift left. I'm a big ITIL proponent. It puts structure and rigor to things that we do in IT, but shift left over the years basically became outsourcing IT to the employee, right? IT's too expensive. Let employees fix their own stuff. They want to fix their own stuff anyway. But that shift left for me was never ideal. ITIL was really conceptually right in the fact that you needed to get the solution information closest to the source of final remediation. If only level 3 knows about the fix, then essentially level 1 and level 2 are useless. Get the solution closer to where the problem happened. It avoids escalations, cost, and delays. How do you think about designing AI that employees actually trust and want to use versus feeling like they're just a delegated member of the IT team? And then a part B to that, how does Nexthink's approach accelerate both zero tickets and broader AI adoption?
Great question, Tim, and 100% wholeheartedly agree with your issue with shift left. To me, at its worst, shift left is like telling users, you think this is easy? Here, go fix this issue yourself.
And it's one we broke, right? It's IT broke you, and now we're going to tell you how to fix it.
And by the way, here are a few KBs.
Right.
You're welcome. So that to me is shift left.
And here's a survey to ask you how we did.
Not exactly a recipe for happy employees. But on the other hand, people really don't like to open tickets. I mean, that's got to be the last resort for people. It's like, I just cannot solve this. I need to escalate this. And the other thing is, I mean, if you look at the digital first generation, I mean, they prefer to resolve the issues themselves. So you're kind of stuck, whether you want it or not. You better create a good shift left strategy because that's what they're calling for, but not the old way of doing things. So what do most people do? Hey, I've got a chatbot. Now it's going to be much better. So I'm going to throw in a few knowledge bases. This barely takes you halfway there. We've got experience with that. I mean, we have device information, application information, network performance data, all of the things that is core to what we do to troubleshoot issues. And in addition, you may need to access the internet for specific information. Hey, is the system really down? I may be looking for all kinds of network information, but guess what? The application is having an issue. And most importantly, you need automated remediations that execute securely and reliably these actions that Sam was talking about earlier. And you need all of this in what I was talking about earlier, in an agent which is conversational, which does it with empathy and the right tone and all of that. That stuff is also important. So that's exactly what we did and what we've built with Nexthink with Spark, basically. It understands your problem with real device-level data, does multi-turn reasoning with that information, meaning I reasoned with the data, I asked another question, I can create a plan, I incorporate your specific knowledge bases that you have that is owned by you into your reasoning. And then with your permission, with the user's permission, runs the scripts to remediate the issue. It eliminates that friction and gets you back to work and hopefully puts a smile on your face. It's basically today's IT agent, not your father's ITIL, if I may say so. So also another thing, I think this was the other point that you had raised, which is today work gets done in SaaS applications, and your typical employee needs to use multiple applications. And when they have difficulty using features within these applications, they waste a bunch of time trying to figure out how to fix things. And if they cannot do that, there isn't a ticket that coming your way. Maybe there is. That's probably a good thing. But most of the time, they just stop using the application if they can get away with it. And you're not getting the productivity you expected when you invested in all these tools and applications. So we have, again, like Spark, an AI-based application adoption guides that assist users in their journey to effectively use these applications and tools you provide. So empowering employees to solve issues themselves and identifying patterns, because remember, Sam talked about one is having employees resolve it themselves. If the employee identified one problem and that exists, the same thing exists with 10,000 other devices, do you want to wait for those tickets to be created? That's an opportunity on the proactive side in an agentic way to identify that there are 10,000 devices for which I can run that same remediation that I ran for that user and solve it proactively. And that's Nexthink's approach to zero tickets. Both give the user the capability that they need, identify patterns, eliminate it across your estate.
I think that's a really important distinction to make. Zero tickets is zero reactive incident management tickets. Can you imagine finding 1,000 blue screens and then opening up 1,000 tickets so the automation can go solve 1,000 issues? We're now flipping to proactive, automated problem management. One ticket, automatically resolving all of those issues and then closing it out with a record. So it's just moving to a more efficient, logical way to operate. And then preventative is don't cause the blue screens to begin with. Sam, the third pillar is why we're in this business, right? It's sometimes you have to do IT for IT's sake, but IT really should be doing IT for the business sake, make the business more profitable, drive revenue, secure and manage risk. This third pillar is all about total visibility, governance, achievable ROI. And as companies scale these AI initiatives to get the most out of this technology, the lack of ROI is a huge problem. And with growing skepticism about how to really rely on this at scale, like Vedant was talking, people are just going to stop using it. If there's another way to do it, it might be perceived as easier if AI is tough to learn or giving them trouble. What blind spots do you see emerging now, and how is Nexthink helping orgs quantify impact on adoption, govern AI safely, and ultimately drive that enterprise-wide value?
Yeah, there is a lot to say about this topic. Before getting into that, maybe we need to make the distinction between two things. Look, there is what we call everyday AI, which is your 365 Copilot, ChatGPT, and so on and so forth. And, when you look at industries and also our internal analysis, that can lead to 5 to 20% efficiency improvement, right? So it means that maybe out of my working day, I get 1 hour back of productivity because I can do many tasks more quickly. And then there is transformational AI, which is as important for the company. And this is really the things that are making a major shift in an entire process, for instance. It could be, automating your customer support, getting rid of an entire manual process. For an engineer, it could be code generation. For a product manager, it could be vibe coding. In my team, product managers now can do prototypes without having to borrow engineering time, which is a great acceleration. So that's transformational AI. And I think it's important to look at them a bit separate because they're kind of different beasts, right? When it comes to everyday AI, one of the main problems for companies is being able to understand adoption. That's a starting point, right? If you want to get to that 5 to 20% efficiency improvements, you need people to adopt it. But how do you manage it? How do you measure it? How do you know what's going on? It's very hard. Which is, by the way, why we launched our AI Drive product and why in 2 months we got to 50% customer penetration, because it's such a fundamental thing, right? But then at the point in which you can start measure adoption, which means you can identify where you need to do enablement, where you need to deploy licenses and all of that. Then the second question, you mentioned that, is absolutely important. What's the ROI? Am I in the 5%? Am I in the 20%? How many tools do I need? How many licenses do I need? This is additional money, right? I mean, nobody had budget for AI 2 years ago. They had to create these budgets. They needed to come from somewhere, right? And so you need to be able to quantify that. That's of fundamental importance. And there are many techniques. We picked an approach that is a mix between analytics and also asking feedback to people. Because at the end of the day, you can come up with very complex math formulas. Nobody's going to believe that. But if I'm telling you, hey, today I saved 1 hour because I had to write that wrong document. I mean, that's a fact, right? I saved 1 hour. And then the other aspect on everyday AI is giving AI adoption teams, which is something that we're starting to see in every large enterprise company, the ability to know what they need to do to drive more adoption. So to come up with a plan that they can track over time that will drive more adoption. And this, once again, is something that we do based on the feedback. But just this thing about knowing where you are is so important. I was thinking about an analogy. It's like, if you don't have a way to measure it, it's like if I ask you, Tim, to take your motorcycle, drive 1,000 miles without Google Maps and without traffic signs. And every time that you want to know where you are, you need to stop and ask somebody on the road. That's how people are doing it. They need to ask people every time. It doesn't work. It's unthinkable, right? So yeah, that was a big part of what we were doing, right? Now, by the way, on this whole topic, there is another opportunity of discovering which tools people are adopting on their own. And you remember 10 years ago, everybody was talking about shadow IT.
Yeah, it's shadow AI now.
Now it's shadow AI.
Yeah.
And, the forward-looking people at the time were saying, look, shadow IT is not a problem. Shadow IT is a huge opportunity because it's telling me, the smart folks in my organization, what are they doing to get more productive, right? Shadow AI is the same thing. It's absolutely the same thing. So for me, obviously there are security risk and data risk and all of that, but it can be a big opportunity because people tend to get creative when they want to get something done. So that's everyday AI. The other aspect is transformational AI. And here, the number one question for every company is, where is my opportunity? Where do I need to go and invest to make a difference? What are those processes? What are those things that are leading to the biggest return? And like in my previous analogy, the only way that they have today is to go and ask people. They do surveys to try to figure out where the bottlenecks are. And, then they pick some things that they feel is gonna generate a return. They automate, they bring AI, but then you don't have an objective way of measure before after, whether it's really generating that value that you're hoping. Are you putting your efforts in the right place? Because let's face it, embedding AI it doesn't come from free. You might need additional tools. You need effort. You need developers. You need to put everything together. And so I believe that the huge opportunity in 2026 will be to automate that part. So to provide the reference of information that says, look, those are the 10 things in where we're seeing that there is huge friction. And if you put AI or if you put automation in those 10 things, you're going to have a huge gain. And we're also going to give you a way to track how that the gain proceeds. It's something that we're going to look at. Maybe you can invite me in a few months in another DEX Show and we're going to talk about that topic.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it. I really like that Nexthink started talking about these 3 pillars. I think they flesh out in a very lucid way just the kind of the pressure on IT leaders in particular, right? Because if you don't tend to all 3 of them, you're not doing AI transformation properly. I think that's quite clear. And I love the way you guys have unpacked them so far. But let's end with you, Vedant. I mean, thinking about that complexity, even intimidating complexity, how is it that Nexthink specifically makes them all realistic and realizable and achievable together?
So one of the things at Nexthink that we've always put front and center is that we're driven to ensure good IT outcomes for our clients. So we started with, you need the ability to collect data, be able to form the foundation for all of the AI you need to put in place. Nexthink Infinity is the platform that can be easily deployed and you can start getting value very quickly. So with AI, we just kind of continued that heritage that we had. And essentially, we've built AI agents that are easy to deploy and natural to use for all three pillars that we talked about. For example, DEX Workspace and Assist for IT admins. Sam went into a lot of detail out there. Spark for employees and IT self-remediation. I talked about that quite a bit. And what Sam was just talking about, AI Drive to measure and drive AI adoption and adopt for optimal application use in your enterprise. So you already have the basis. If you already are a client, you've deployed it, you can just enable it and start using it. And on top of that, for like anything in the enterprise, we offer extensive online training and support to ensure success. So we made sure that with all of the agentic stuff that we're deploying, that we support that with whatever documentation to get it deployed quickly. Our services teams and CSMs are there from the start and have been trained to help. So the bottom line is we're there to ensure you realize the value and get the products up and running quickly. So everything that we've always done, we're now doing with AI for you, basically.
Very well said. And I have to stress that anybody who is listening and maybe hadn't heard about Spark before, it's possible, right? You missed experience or you just haven't come across it and you think, I want to know more. You are listening to the right show, because it's going to be Spark Month in about a week or two. I think we've got a series of incredible shows lined up where Tim and I and the Reality Bites team are going to be just exploring and unpacking in detail this really remarkable, game-changing innovation that we've teased a little bit today. But I think for now, this is a good way to kick off the year, gentlemen. Vedant, thanks so much for your first appearance with us today. It's been great to have you on. Sam, thanks for coming back, kicking off the new year again. Happy New Year, everybody, and I hope we all have a fantastic 2026. Can you believe it?
Thanks, guys. Happy
Thank
New
you
Year.
very much.
Thank you.
To make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to leave a rating of the show. Just tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves. If you'd like to learn more about how Nexthink can help you improve your digital employee experience, head over to nexthink.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.